Hi everyone. So I recorded a video on Monday of this week, and that video ended up going live today, which is Wednesday. And as soon as it went live, or maybe even a little before it went live, it was completely out of date. That video was about what the Oscars are going to do and sort of about the theatrical window stuff. And then there was breaking news on Tuesday night, so I figured I had to do a follow-up. So, first of all, the breaking news on the Oscars is that they are going to carve out a exception for films that had to go direct to VOD while theaters were closed. So it is not a permanent exemption. When the theaters reopen, the exemption will expire, but they'll no longer require that a movie play in a theater in Los Angeles for 7 days in order to qualify if it was during the period that theaters are closed. So some of those movies, including The King of Staten Island, I again haven't seen the movie, don't know if it's actually Oscar worthy for Pete Davidson or if it's crap. I'm interested in seeing it, but that would qualify, as well as some of these other smaller movies that have been able to open, because the only theaters that are open right now are drive-thrus. I know there's one drive-thru in Florida that's still showing new movies, so I know they showed the Jesse Eisenberg, Marcel Marceau Mime movie. I think they showed Swallow, the Haley Bennett movie that I've been interested in seeing but haven't yet. So that's it. And none of them are in Los Angeles, as far as I know. So they carved that out. So, I mean, we don't know what the Oscars are going to look like next year, because we still don't know what caliber and amount of movies will be released this year. That all depends on when movie theaters reopen and whether people want to hedge their bets, and then even the Oscar ceremony. What are they going to sit checkerboard pattern? I mean, if there's still no vaccine by February or March, we may still be doing somewhat social distancing, even if they open up the economy. I don't know. Everything's kind of up in the air. But speaking of the theatrical window, so Universal ended up solidifying that they made a lot of money on just dumping Trolls World Tour directly to VOD. It did open in a few drive-ins as well, but mostly VOD. And in the previous video, I discussed the family movie hypothesis I had, and I know Warner Brothers is also dropping Scoob. I think they're still planning to drop Scoob in May, direct to VOD. And then Disney's doing Artemis Fowl, and yeah, a bunch of other are either selling off their movies or they're doing it to premium on demand. So, after that announcement, I guess what was sort of buried under the byline was that Universal said that they may, going forward, may utilize VOD more for new releases, day and date, as they say, with the theatrical release, where it opens in theaters and on VOD the same day. Now, of course, most movie theaters have a 90-day window where, especially the big chains, where they will not show a movie in their theaters if it drops on any sort of home or digital market less than 90 days after that release date. A few theaters don't follow that. The Alamo Drafthouse, as I've mentioned, has shown Netflix movies there. I mean, if you're a theater like that, where you're kind of a full restaurant and not just selling popcorn, the amount of money you'll make on concessions, and theaters make all their money from concessions anyway, they make very little from the actual ticket price. Anywhere between 20 to 50% of the ticket price will go to the theater, and the rest will go to the studio, especially the sooner or the newer it is in theaters, the more goes to the studio. Sometimes it's a 70-30 or an 80-20 cut for the first weekend. I think it was 80-20 for like the last few Star Wars ones with Disney. Disney likes to push their weight around that kind of stuff. So like a thing like that, where if you're selling like meals, like restaurant meals, where you're making probably $40-50 just from selling your alcohol and all of that stuff, as opposed to the people who might spend. Well, I mean, when I worked at a Regal as a manager, people bought way more concessions than I ever thought they would, and Regal just had kind of the normal stuff, and we kind of had some shitty hot food and stuff, but I don't know, people buy a lot more concessions than I ever thought. Because prior to going to Alamo, because they, at least if I'm not hungry, at least they have a good section of beer or whatever, but prior to going to Alamo, and prior to working at a movie theater where I could eat concessions pretty much on duty for free, and then they gave you a 50% discount if you weren't on duty, and you were just going to see a movie as a civilian, I really wasn't much for concessions, because, I mean, they're overpriced, and, I can sit for 2 hours without stuffing my fat fucking face, so, I mean, some people can't, but I certainly can. So for them, it's really no skin off their back if, they're open for that. But for a lot of movies, people like myself, and if you're watching this video, chances are you too, really like the theatrical experience, where even if a movie is available at home, and possibly cheaper than a movie ticket, though with subscription passes, AMC stubs, was it Regal Unlimited, and Alamo Season Pass, the price tends to be cheaper to go to the movies if you go there a lot and you don't have concessions. I would still choose to go see it at the theater because I prefer that experience. And to a certain extent, while I personally am afraid that the theater experience will die out because I like going to the theater, the idea that all of the assholes and troglodytes who talk during a movie or play on their phone or don't respect the movie-going experience or the experience of those around them, the idea that those assholes would just stay home and watch and half watch a movie while they're scrolling through their social media like assholes who don't pay attention to movies, like them, they can stay home. I don't care about them, but movie theaters want as many people in the seats as possible to maximize their revenue, obviously, because, capitalism. So, so about that theatrical window, Universal saying that they're willing to do this day and date thing, that's obviously caused movie theaters to panic, and AMC was the first one to jump on this. AMC was like, we're not going to show any Universal movies anymore if you're going to open everything day and date. Now, Universal didn't say they were going to open every movie day and date. They just said they might attempt to open some. So the blanket ban of all Universal movies was kind of, obviously it was a warning shot, because AMC, all theaters are closed. AMC is on the brink of bankruptcy. So they don't have much leverage right now, so they kind of had to do something to show, like, hey, we're not going to let this theatrical window whittle away while we're weakened, kind of thing. And then later today, Regal sort of jumped on the bandwagon for that. But generally, it would just be whatever, like, it would show whatever movie was not day and date, and they just wouldn't show what is day and date. Because there are some studios, Lionsgate is one, where sometimes they'll release a day and date movie, and the art houses and the indie theaters or the Alamos will play the movie while it's on VOD, but the big chains, your AMCs, your Regals, your Cinemarks, your National Amusements would not. But there's no blanket ban against Lionsgate. They just kind of pick and choose what movies they'll show. And maybe because Lionsgate's a mini major as opposed to Universal being one of the big studios, I don't know if that makes a difference, or if it's just that AMC didn't like the tone of many Universal's recent press releases where they're really punching up VOD and not really giving a shit. And more than any other studio, Universal really has gone whole hog on this VOD thing since theaters closed. Between The Hunt, Invisible Man, and also, I forgot in my last video, Emma, they released all of those VOD as soon as theaters closed, and those were still in the midst of the theatrical runs. And then they were the first ones to say that they were dropping Trolls day and date and not postponing it at all. Because most of the other studios, aside from Warner Brothers with Scoob, they've either sold their movies off to Netflix, like Lovebirds was. I think Paramount did that for Lovebirds. Paramount and Netflix usually have that relationship. Or Disney pushing something to its regular streaming service and not VOD and not putting it in theaters at all. They've done stuff like that. But Universal's really gone on this, so I think they needed to do that salvo. But is Universal going to release all of their movies day and date with VOD? Probably not. Especially because once a movie hits VOD, it hits Pirate Bay, and it hits the BitTorrents. As soon as something hits VOD, there's pirated copies everywhere, which is, I don't know how much piracy affects lost revenue. There's studies saying it affects it greatly, and there's studies that say it doesn't at all, that people just use it as sampling, and they end up purchasing the movie downstream or whatever. I have no idea. I'm not sure if there's any comprehensive peer-reviewed economic study about this. But as soon as that happens, it always gets pirated. Just like if they release a movie in Korea, whatever, there's always pirated copies with hard-coded subs on them. So I'm not sure if Universal would want to throw their big guns, because two big movies, one was pushed to next year and one was pushed later to this year, that Universal is releasing are the new James Bond movie and the next Fast and Furious movie. James Bond has been under Sony for a while, and MGM, I believe, owns the rights, but Universal got the distribution deal on this particular one. But both of those movies make more money internationally than they do domestically. They're big international hits. I remember when Fast and Furious, I believe it was 7, came out, it came out in 3D overseas, because overseas likes 3D more than the US does. and it only came out 2D in the U.S. Because they I mean, they love 3D. I mean, I like 3D too. I know I'm in the minority there, but I find that 3D can make bad special effects look a little bit better in some movies. And if it's done well, if it's filmed 3D as opposed to upscaling, it can look pretty good. But yeah, people love those fucking horrible Fast and Furious movies. So I don't get it. I saw the first one and I saw the fourth one, and that's all I really need to say. They're not good. And when I was a manager at a theater, I walked into number 7 a number of times to check the theater, and it always seemed like garbage. Yeah. Anyway, so with those two movies, I'm not sure if Universal would release those VOD the same day that they'd release them theatrically, because they are bigger blockbusters, and they're the type of movie that even people who prefer to watch movies at home, they'll still go out to see on the big screen. Your big event movies, your Marvel stuff, and your Star Wars are kind of like that too, where people will make a special trip to the theater even if they prefer to normally wait until things get on the home video market. And those two movies are probably the same thing. They probably want to avoid piracy, and those will probably make more money on the big screen than if they did a premium VOD. So those probably wouldn't be day and date. But if AMC and now Regal and Cinemark and a couple other theaters aren't going to show anything for Universal, that's going to cut out both of those, as well as other movies that Universal might have tried to push through, like a lot of Blumhouse movies. But there's Run, Sweetheart, Run, about it seems like it's a vampire, the vampire stalker, or the Candyman sequel / soft reboot. Those are movies that I could clearly see, especially because two Blumhouse movies were, The Hunt and Invisible Man. They also put on VOD after their prematurely cut theatrical releases. So I could see Universal trying to do that with day and date, but I'm not sure they do, the two big money makers. And also, I'm not sure if AMC and Regal want to leave that money on the table. And again, Regal is now owned by Cineworld. I left Regal right when this was happening, but it was bought by a British company. And from the friends I have who worked at the theater a little bit longer than I did, apparently when they came in, they wanted a bunch of changes, and a lot of them have quit since then. I know very few people who still work for the theater when they worked the same number of years. I worked there like about 3.5 years or so. They don't really work there anymore in the Cineworld. Apparently they did not like them. But that's the UK market, and AMC is owned by China now, or at least a Chinese conglomerate, and all the Chinese companies are kind of owned by the state. So, I mean, I'm sure Universal doesn't want to give up any Chinese revenue they could get from there, and AMC does have a big international footprint, as well as the fact that just AMC has more theaters in the US than any other company, and then Regal is number 2. So if your top 2 theater chains are not carrying your movie in theaters and you want to make theatrical revenue still, that's going to be a little tough. So the theaters do have some leverage there. Right now I think both sides are kind of just saber-rattling, and they'll probably come to some agreement. And the reason I think that is because when I was thinking about this, I remembered something that happened when I was still working at Regal a few years back, where Paramount wanted to do an experiment, and they chose 2 movies to do this experiment with. One was Paranormal Activity: The Ghost Dimension, which was the very last Paranormal Activity movie, and a horror comedy called The Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse. Basically, Paramount wanted this experiment where they would put it to VOD earlier than the 90-day window. And the idea was that they would do it, I believe, 17 days after it dropped below 300 screens. My numbers might be slightly off there, but that's my recollection of it. So basically, a movie might open, if it's a big movie, it'll open like 3,000, 4,000 screens. If it's your average movie, between 500 and 1,500 screens, give or take. So they were going to wait till it dropped to almost like dollar theater number of screens and then kick it onto VOD in, roughly 2.5 weeks. So to get the theaters on board with this, Paramount agreed to cut the theaters into some of the VOD revenue. And so AMC jumped on it. AMC was willing to show the movies and was willing to partake in that revenue. A couple other theater chains were. I know Alamo, which has no problem with it, Alamo jumped on it, and a couple other ones did. But Regal did not. So, which was odd, because both movies I was interested in seeing at the time. Scouts had a pretty funny trailer, and Paranormal Activity, the very last one, even though I skipped the marked ones, and I absolutely hated Paranormal Activity 4. That was probably the worst of the series to me. This one was going to be in 3D, and I kind of wanted to see how it is, because, again, I like 3D. But it never opened. Regal refused to open it, and both movies ended up underperforming. I'm not sure if that's because the second biggest movie chain in the country refused to play it. So even, I think most of the Paranormal Activity movies after the first one, which had sort of a rollout release, they opened on like 2,000, 3,000 screens because they started to become big, $100 million hits. And then this one only opened on, 1,000, 1,200 screens. So maybe the lack of screens, there was also bad reviews and things like that. So both movies underperformed, but whether they would have done better if they also opened at Regal or if the studio put more marketing buzz behind it, knowing that they would be on more screens, who knows? I guess we'll never know. I eventually did see both movies when they hit the home video market. Both were mediocre. Ghost Dimension probably would have been better if I could have seen it in 3D, but, whatever. Scouts had some funny moments, but otherwise it was kind of a sketch comedy that played itself thin. So I'm not sure. Well, I understand why Paramount would have chosen Paranormal Activity because it's a name brand you can experiment with. Scout's Guide, I'm not sure. That movie doesn't really feel like a Paramount movie anyway, so I guess maybe they were just trying to see what they could do with it. So the fact that AMC agreed to closing the window as long as they were cutting to the money, that leads me to believe that if Universal wants to try this experiment with movies that aren't kids' movies or aren't just trolls, that they will perhaps end up coming up with some other deal. Because I know when Netflix was releasing The Irishman, they were trying to come up with some sort of deal that they couldn't reach because, it's a Scorsese movie, they wanted Scorsese's movie to be in the theater, Netflix did. Scorsese wants his movie to be shown in the theater, so they were hoping they could come up with something, but unless Netflix, cut the theaters into some subscriber revenue because they don't pay per movie on Netflix, it's a subscriber service, I don't really know how they could have, because I think they wanted maybe like a 30 or maybe a 60-day window tops. I don't know. That's why I'm grateful that Alamo Drafthouse played it for like a weekend, and I ended up seeing I think I saw a 11 o'clock or a midnight show, and I didn't get home till like 4 a.m., but I was wide awake the whole time and loved the movie. It was in my top 10 last year. So that's why I kind of like that. Yeah, I could have waited to watch it on Netflix, but it's Scorsese. You should see it on the big screen. But I'm not sure what's gonna happen with this. Both sides, again, like I said, they're saber-rattling, and it can kind of go either way. But the Oscars is carving out their exception, and who knows? The big thing will be, right now, everyone is looking to July 17th when Tenet is set to open, the Christopher Nolan movie. And theaters are basically hoping that with all health guidelines, local and federal guidelines, they'll be able to open with some capacity that weekend for that movie to get back in. Which is still, I'm recording this in the very end of April, so that's still 2.5 whole months away, and movie theaters have been closed since roughly March 16th, mostly. That's still a long time, but I'm not sure if it's going to be long enough, but they're really hoping for that. Or maybe a few theaters are hoping that they can open earlier and play some library product or some very older movies until that comes out. But I don't know. But when Tenet does open and the Academy thing goes by the wayside, I guess we'll find out. But mostly what we're going to find out is when the first big Universal movie comes out. And I know they have Candyman, which is probably not that big a movie. Horror fans are excited about it, and a little cautious because Tony Todd didn't seem like he was in the trailer, and what's Candyman without Tony Todd? So that might be a little bit of whether Universal decides to experiment with that one. And I think Rent Sweetheart Run was supposed to open this spring, but I don't think they gave it a new date yet. Yeah, I don't think they did. But one assumes they would either push it to the fall or they'd push it to the spring or maybe late August rather, because horror movies usually do well in late August. Maybe they'll experiment with that, but the big test will be when Bond opens, because Fast and Furious was pushed back to next May. They pushed that back a whole year. They still wanted it to be a summer movie, so yeah. But when Bond opens, and that's the international market, that's, it's Daniel Craig's supposedly last one, it's probably going to get all the Bond fans and a lot of action fans in there. Is Universal going to cave? Or are AMC and Regal and the big chains going to cave, or what's going to happen? Because I don't see them pushing Bond VOD day and date. My guess is that's going to be theatrical exclusive, just for the revenue stream and the international revenue stream, and to avoid the piracy. But if the two major chains do not pay that movie, then Universal is going to have some financial setback, but also I have a feeling fans are going to also have a backlash. They might cancel their subscription plans or whatnot, because, I mean, I'm lucky that I live adjacent to the capital of my state that has an Alamo Drafthouse in it, but most people who don't live in, your boutique places where, Chicago, New York, LA, where they have many theater choices, they only have, a rural theater that is owned by a chain, and that's like the one multiplex within an hour that you can drive to. And if that one multiplex is either an AMC or a Regal, or where I'm from in New England, like a National Amusements or something, and National Amusements hasn't made any pronouncements, by the way, but if those big chains aren't carrying this, big movie, or what's supposed to be a big movie, then they're not really going to have an option unless they drive hours and hours to it. So it's kind of a sticky situation, and it's still unfolding. So aside from Regal's statement, I haven't seen anything different, just that Universal sort of clarified that they're not going to release every movie VOD, that they want to continue negotiations with the theater, and that it's going to be on a movie-by-movie basis. So they did clarify that, because some of their previous comments sort of made it sound like that was just going to be, business as usual going forward. But, right now, the theater chains and the National Association of Theater Owners are not very happy with Universal, and Universal is probably not very happy with that. And then you have movie fans, you have, the people who their only theater is a chain, and they're sort of upset that they won't be able to see the movies of their choice at their chain. And then you have just the people who don't even like the theater and like to stay home anyway, and so they're upset, and it's a whole big kerfuffle. And so I am very interested to see what happens, and I'm also interested to see how other movie theaters follow suit. Because I think the movie and other movie studios, because I think the movie theaters probably would have let Universal slide with just Trolls, and maybe even just King of Staten Island, and maybe they'll let Warner Brothers with just Scoob. But I think it was mainly that Universal sort of made that statement that this was more than just a coronavirus exception, that they were going to change this as to their business as usual idea, or their business as usual philosophy. That is what got the movie theaters nervous. And right now, movie theaters have a lot to be nervous about, because they are making zip in revenue right now. Well, my Alamo Drafthouse, they doing some DoorDash deliveries for the food they make for some of it, and you can pick up a crowler and some beer and some household supplies curbside and stuff. So they're making a little bit of revenue, and they sell merchandise through Mondo and everything. Alamo will be fine. Fingers crossed. But your Regal and your AMCs, what are they making? Gift card purchases? That's about all they're earning right now. So it's gonna be rough. But what do you think's going to happen? Whose side are you? Are you on the side of the studios, or are you on the side of the movie theaters? Do you have a preference? Are you interested? Do you not care? Do you just want to see your movie? What are your thoughts? Leave a comment below, trying to get a bit more engagey on this channel, as I'm finally getting more videos out in this quarantine after I get off my work from home shift. And yeah, I'll talk to you next time, and we'll talk more about this as things